Hello everyone, welcome back to Educator Fresh. In the last session, we walked through assessment objective 1, which includes cell biology, respiration, and molecular analysis. And I said at the end of the exam, that the exam skeleton we built there wasn't just for assessment objective 1. It was the skeleton for the entire exam. Today, we are going to prove that by applying the exact same approach to a completely different body of content, that is plant physiology and adaptation, otherwise known as assessment objective 2. Now, here is what I want you to notice as we go through today's session. The command words are the same: analyze, account, examine, evaluate, justify, and assess. The structure of every scenario is not going to change. We will always have a context, we shall have some data, and a set of tasks that escalate on the biological, that escalate from explanation to application to strategy. What is going to change is the biological content underneath. And today that content is photosynthesis, plant hormones, water balance in plants, and seed germination and growth. So, if AO1 was about a single cell, how a single cell stays alive, what do you think assessment objective 2 is about? That's right, it's about how the whole plant survives, how it grows, how it produces yield in the real environmental conditions like drought, like heat, like light stress. And because this is a biology syllabus, almost every assessment objective 2 is eventually going to tell you to solve a problem of stress towards the plant. Let's look at the 4 topics that are integrated. Listed at the bottom of this slide are the topics that are involved. We have photosynthesis, we have coordination in plants, which means, of course, the hormones that control plant growth and how plants respond to the changes in the environment. We have homeostasis in plants, we have water balance, and seed dormancy and growth. By the end of this session, you will have seen exactly how a question can weave all these 4 together in a single scenario, and how exactly you can use these topics and this information to answer it. Let's get into it. Now, assessment objective 2 asks you to think like a plant physiologist. Now, I want to start by breaking down what assessment objective 2 is actually asking of you, because there is a really common mistake that students make here, and I want to head it off immediately. There are 4 words that I'm going to show you on the screen here. The first word is to know, do, to think, and apply. These are 4 layers of thinking that every single assessment objective 2 question is going to test. Whether the question says so explicitly or not, there are things that you must know. Let's start with know. When we talk about knowing, we are talking about your content base. We are talking about the things that you know about the plant. These include the chloroplast structure, the C3 and C4 pathways, the limiting factors, the plant adaptations like xerophytes, mesophytes, and hydrophytes, the plant hormones, germination and growth. This is what you would revise from a textbook. It is necessary, but here is a problem. It is not sufficient. Knowing alone in assessment objective 2 in an exam will get you a third of the marks on a typical task. Knowing that maize is a C4 plant and that beans are C3 plants will earn you almost nothing if you don't know what you are going to do with that fact. This is what brings us to the second task. You will be tasked to do something. This is where you are going to take your knowledge and apply it to actual data, analyzing a photosynthetic rate table, comparing crop yield figures, interpreting stomato aperture measurements under different water conditions. This means you may have to read a graph or a table or extract a biological story that it's telling. The third level that you're going to be required to know is thinking. When we tell you to think, this is where most of the marks are going to be, because you must express this in an essay form. This is where we are going to be writing. You are going to evaluate a management strategy. You're going to judge whether an intervention will actually work. You're going to synthesize an explanation that pulls together more than one biological process. This is high order reasoning. This is the difference between describing what C4 photosynthesis is and explaining why a C4 pathway gives a specific crop a specific advantage in a specific climate. And finally, the fourth level is application. The fourth level is application. Here in application, we are going to connect all of this back to a real-world challenge, and that is food security, drought management, yield optimization, sustainable farming. These are things that are going to be very relevant when you are answering assessment objective 2. Because remember, when we are designing this particular assessment objective, we are thinking about the Ugandan, real Ugandan, when they are dealing with plants. How do we deal with plants? Sometimes we are going to talk about farmers, we are going to talk about seed banks, we are going to talk about climate variability, and so on and so forth. That changes that affect plant growth. Now, the exam wants to see if you can take the biology out of the textbook and put it to work solving an actual problem a farmer or a policymaker would face. Now, here is a trap that I mentioned. Students often stop at the first level, which is knowing. But usually, what they will do usually is they are going to write 3 excellent sentences that recite the C4 pathway because they crammed it. They will talk about PEP carboxylase, they will talk about the bundle sheet cells, they will talk about the Kranz anatomy, and that's it. They will stop there. But the marks are not going to be at that level. The marks are at the level of evaluation, which is thinking. You must go beyond it. You must be able to also apply, judge that a strategy is effective, and apply that information to solve the farmer's problem. So as we go through today's worked example, I want you to watch for how the strongest answers don't just stop at explaining the biology, but they always take the extra step into explaining what this means for the farmer, the crop, and the food system. I want you to keep these 4 words in your head for the rest of this session. We are going to come back to them again and again. Now, let's continue with understanding assessment objective 4. Assessment objective 2, has 4 topics that are involved in it. Now, on the left side of our screen, we have the topics. The first topic is nutrition in plants. This covers chloroplast structure, the C3 and the C4 photosynthetic pathways, limiting factors like light, temperature, carbon dioxide concentration, and the structure and the function of guard cells, which control the stomata. So topic 5b is about plant adaptation. This is about xerophytes, which plants are adapted to dry conditions, mesophytes, which are your average plants adapted to moderate water availability, and hydrophytes, the plants that are adapted to live in or near water. And it also covers tomato distribution and water management strategies in plants. Topic 6 is about coordination. And specifically in plants, coordination means hormones, oxygens like gibberellins, abscisic acid, usually what we call ABA, and another hormone called ethylene, plus 2 behavioral responses like tropisms, which are directional growth responses, like plants bending towards light, photoperiodism, which is how plants respond to day length, and particularly around flowering. It's very important to talk about that. The 4th topic is growth in plants, which is germination, seed dormancy, and how we can utilize the seed banks for agricultural planning, and the distinction between primary and secondary growth. Now, this is what is important. In an exam scenario, these don't show up alone. Look at the italic note at the bottom there. A single drought-themed scenario might require you to explain C3 versus C4 biochemistry from topic 2, then explain ABA-driven stomato closure from topic 6, and then finish with a seed bank storage recommendation from topic 8, all in one connected answer. That's the assessment objective 2 exam in a nutshell. It is testing whether you can move fluidly between these 4 topics within a single train of thought, because that's exactly what a real plant does. It doesn't experience photosynthesis and hormone signaling and growth as separate, unconnected events. They are all happening together at the same time, all the time, in response to the same environment. Now, let's go to this side of the screen, the cognitive skills ladder. I want you to notice something here. This ladder is identical in shape to the one we used in assessment objective 1. We have knowledge and understanding, and then we have application and analysis, synthesis and evaluation. So the evaluation at the top. The actual skill of climbing this ladder, moving from simply recalling a structure to applying it, to analyzing the data with it, to evaluating a strategy built on it. That skill transfers completely between assessment objectives. Only the vocabulary is going to change. In assessment objective 1, you were climbing the ladder with mitochondria and ATP. Today you are climbing that exact same ladder with chloroplasts and abscisic acid. This is good news, by the way. It means that mastering this ladder once is worth 4 times as much, because you are going to use it in every single assessment objective. Let's continue. Now, there's something that we're going to be talking about here. In assessment objective 2, the structure of the scenario still does not change, because just like in assessment objective 1, every single scenario you will meet, this objective is built from exactly 3 parts every time without exceptions. Part A is the context introduction. This is the little story, a real farming or experimental situation. And here is your first job. Whenever you read one of these, I want you to identify the crop type. Is it C3 or is it C4? What's the climate like? Is water available or is it limited? I cannot stress this enough. That single identification step of C3 or C4, well watered or drought stressed, usually unlocks half the marks. Once you understand this question, most of the marks become available to you if you know how to write. If you misidentify the type of crop at the start, chances are that every mechanism you write afterwards may be wrong. The second part is the data. And in the data, assessment objective 2 is most times always going to be one of two. Either crop yield figures, photosynthetic rate table, stomato aperture measurements, hormonal concentration data, and in most cases, it's going to be presented in contrasting conditions. Irrigated versus deficit. We may have treated versus untreated. Highlight versus low light. The exam is going to be built around comparison. Now, your job is to spot exactly where these two conditions diverge. Part C. Part C is going to be the tasks. There may be 1 or 2, sometimes there may be 4, depending on the level at which your teacher is still examining you. Now, these are going to move from explanation to application to strategy. And here's a pattern you can rely on. The very last task in assessment objective 2 sequence will almost always ask you to justify an agricultural recommendation. It wants you to take everything you've explained and turn it into advice for either a farmer or a policymaker or people in general. Now, when you sit down to a brand new assessment objective 2 scenario you've never seen before, you should ask yourself, what crop type am I looking at, and what is the environmental stress that I need to know? Everything else follows once you get that right. Let's have a step-by-step reading strategy for these plant scenarios. Now, you can run through these 5 steps every time you meet a scenario, and you can perform it like a checklist in your head as you read it. Step 1, you need to identify the plant type and the environment. Is it C3 or is it C4? What's the climate? Is water limiting? These are the 3 questions that are going to decide which biology is going to be central to the answers you are going to write. If you get this wrong at step 1, you will be explaining the wrong mechanism for the rest of the question. Step 2, look for the problem. Is the yield declining? Are stomata closing? Is germination failing? This is going to tell you which biological process you need to focus on. A question about wilting is going to point you towards water relation and stomatal behavior. A question about poor seed establishment is going to point you towards dormancy and germination physiology. The third step is to examine the data that you've been given carefully. Before you even look at the tasks, you need to compare whether we are talking about irrigated versus deficit conditions, or we are looking at conditions of high light intensity or conditions of low light intensity. What is the actual pattern between the 2 conditions? Don't skip to the questions and then scan the data for the answer. No. Always read the data first alone on its own terms and ask yourself, what is the data telling me? Step number 4. I want you to identify which assessment objective 2 topics are actually triggered by this particular scenario. Is it for the photosynthetic pathway being triggered? Are there limiting factors at play? Is it hormonal control? Is it water adaptation? Are we looking at a growth stage? Most scenarios may trigger more than one of these processes. And the fifth step that you need to look at is what is going to separate your answer from being a C grade to going to an A grade answer. I want you to answer your questions with mechanisms and not slogans. For example, I want you to think about this. Which one is more enough? To write more water means more growth. Okay? It's when a person writes more water means more growth. Is that a biological answer? That's a slogan. It can even be an advert. What you've written is not wrong, but it will not earn you marks, because what you've written does not explain any biological process. Okay? What you need to do is to state the specific processes that are affected and exactly how they are affected. So instead of writing more water helps the plant, you would rather write increased water availability keeps the stomata open, maintaining carbon dioxide entry into the leaf, sustaining the rate of carbon fixation in the Calvin cycle. Now, I want you to think about that. Do you notice the difference between the two sentences? One is simply a blank statement without any biology in it. The other could only be written by someone who actually understands the mechanism. That's what step 5 is asking you to produce every single time. Let's talk about the command words. In my experience, this is where a lot of marks quietly disappears. Not because students don't know the biology, but because they answer the wrong type of question. The command word sets the ceiling on your mark. If you mismatch the command word, you cap your own score, no matter how much biology you know. There are going to be 4 words. We are going to look at about 4 or 5 words. The first one is analyze. When they tell you to analyze, they are telling you to break down the crop or the photosynthetic data given to you and identify the causes and the effects with a biological explanation. Now, you must avoid reading the numbers of a table without explaining the mechanisms behind them. If a question says analyze the data and your answer is just the rate was higher in maize than in beans, you have described the data, you have not analyzed it. Analysis requires you to say why that particular thing happened. The second thing is to examine. Now, to examine, this means that you are going to investigate a particular plant adaptation in depth. You are going to link structure to function. Now, you must avoid listing features without linking each one of the actual challenge to the scenario. If you are asked to examine xerophyte adaptations, don't just list thick cuticle, reduced leaves, deep roots, as if you're listing a shopping list. No. For each feature, you need to say what problem it solves. Now, I want you to think about that. Instead of just going out there and you tell us just basic words, you link every structure to its unique function. The next command word is to account for. When they tell you to account for something, it means give us the biological reasons that explain this difference. Whether it is a difference in yield, whether it is a difference in the growth pattern, you are telling us account for the disparity, the discrepancy in the data that has been given to you. Now, you must avoid restating the data that was given to you the way it is given to you, instead of explaining why that data happened. For example, telling us that the yield of beans was lower than that of maize is just restating the data that has been given to you. We know that the yield of beans is lower. That is given to us in the data. Beans yield was lower because elevated temperatures increased rubisco oxygenase activity, which triggered photorespiration. That is accounting. The next word that they can tell you is to evaluate. Now, evaluate in most cases is going to be used to judge an agricultural strategy's effectiveness using evidence. Now, what you should avoid, and this is a big one, is to simply list advantages without weighing effectiveness. As an evaluate answer that only lists positiveness is incomplete by definition. You must weigh, which means you must show what both works and what the limits of that particular strategy are. The fifth word is to justify. Here you are going to give biological and data-based evidence for a recommendation for avoiding opinions without citing the data or the underlying process. For example, if you say, I think farmers should switch to maize, that is an opinion. farmers should consider maize because table 1 shows it's sustaining 98% of peak photosynthetic rate at 38 degrees Celsius, driven by its carbon dioxide concentrating mechanism. That is a justification. Do you see the difference? One person simply said farmers should switch to maize. That is an opinion. The other person gave the reasons in data why farmers should switch to maize, because it is optimizing the current environmental conditions. And finally, you can be told to assess. Now, some of these questions are going to be put in the same block of a question, in the same block of a task, but it will have those components, and if you're careful, you'll be able to see those questions in those differences. When they tell you to assess, they are telling you to weigh multiple agricultural or environmental factors and make a judgment. When you are doing this, you should avoid one-sided answers that ignore other trade-offs. Now, out of these 6, which 2 do you think students will commonly under-answer? In my experience, it is going to be evaluating and assessing or analyzing, because both of them demand that you hold 2 ideas in your head at once: what works and what doesn't, or what the cost is. It is tempting to just write the positive side and stop there. I want you to resist that. Every time you see the word to evaluate, train your brain to physically write the word however or the word but somewhere in your answer, because that is usually where the limitation is. This is good, this works, but training your mind to think like that is going to give you the edge in answering the question that concerns evaluation. Now, this video is getting very long, and we are going to stop here for now. But in the next part, we are going to try an example of a question in assessment objective 2. And we are going to take what we have just covered, the 4 layers, the 5-step reading strategy, the 6 command words, and apply it to a real scenario that is given to us in our workbook. Thank you for watching. Click onto the next video for part 2 of this video. And I remain Solomon. Thank you for watching Educator Fresh. Please like and subscribe to our channel, and have a good time.